Rick Ness didn't just lose a permit. He got hit with a ban no miner in the Yukon has ever seen. One moment he's gearing up for the biggest push of his season. The next chaos began with a document that was never meant to see daylight. A confidential mining compliance memo, no signature, no routing code, no official stamp, leaked into a tiny corner of an obscure industry forum late at night. Its timestamp? Months before seasonal permits were even opened. And right there, sitting in the middle of the page in bold letters, was a phrase nobody in the Yukon mining world had ever seen applied to a working miner. Pre-disqualified Ness Rick. Whoever wrote it expected it to stay buried. The problem was, someone out there decided tonight was the night to blow the whole thing open. Before we dive in, hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is unfolding faster than the Yukon permafrost in a heat wave, and you do not want to miss what comes next. What made the memo even stranger was the violation code it referenced, a string of numbers that didn't match any known section of the Mining Conduct and Compliance Act. Regulators, historians, even retired inspectors started digging, trying to match it to anything in the last 4 decades of Yukon mining law. Nothing matched. It was as if the code had been invented on the spot and quietly slipped into an internal system no outsider was ever supposed to see. Analysts started whispering, was this a genuine document, or was someone crafting a legal trap long before Rick even stepped onto his claim this season? The leak didn't explode immediately. It spread like smoke instead. Thin, quiet, drifting through inboxes and late-night group chats across the territory. But everything changed the moment a copy landed on Parker Schnabel's geological strategist's desk. Within minutes, a private call went out, not to Parker directly, but to a senior operator on his crew. The message was short: monitor the eastern perimeter at sunrise. No explanation, no reasoning, just a command. By dawn, the Yukon rumor mill was fully awake, buzzing with one dangerous consensus. Something huge had been set in motion, and nobody knew yet whether it was a mistake, sabotage, or the opening move in a coordinated takeover. Across the valley, Parker's drone operators were doing their routine sweeps when they noticed something off. Rick Ness's wash plant cameras, normally live 24/7, were dark, not offline, not disconnected, just frozen. The last frame locked in place exactly 16 hours earlier. That wasn't a glitch. That was someone shutting things down from the inside. The drones widened their sweep and picked up abandoned fuel drums sitting in a crooked row, conveyors dusted with untouched pay dirt, hoses coiled like someone walked away mid-shift. It looked less like a scheduled stop and more like the entire operation hit a wall instantly. Parker's foreman stared at the data, trying to make sense of it. Is he hiding a discovery, he muttered, or did someone shut him down? But Parker didn't answer. He didn't even look at the footage. Instead, he walked over to the seismic monitor, a tool most crews never bother with because it takes expertise to read properly. He tapped the screen twice, zoomed in on the boundary line between his land and Rick's, and stared at the deep field vibrations coming through. It wasn't surface noise. It wasn't machinery. Something heavy was shifting underground, the kind of pattern that only appears when Earth is settling over a geological structure that's just been disturbed. Get a monitoring team out there, Parker said calmly, but everyone around him felt the tension under his voice. Parker didn't act like a man seeing an opportunity. He acted like someone who'd been expecting something like this for a long time. The graphs kept pulsing, faint but regular, like a heartbeat from deep inside the earth. Whatever it wasn't small. Meanwhile, on the other side of the silent wash plant, Rick's world had already flipped upside down. His inner crew packed into an old equipment shed around midnight, the only light coming from headlamps reflecting off the rusted walls. The rest of the claim was dark. The generators were shut off. Rick stood at the center, holding the ban notice on a cracked tablet screen, rotating it slowly so the others could see the blurred digital signature at the bottom. It wasn't blurred by accident. It looked auto-generated, the kind of template signature used for internal drafts, not legally binding documents. They didn't sign it, Rick said quietly. Someone didn't want to. A mechanic at the back stepped forward, visibly nervous. Earlier that day, he'd overheard a mining board agent talking on the phone in rushed whispers. The name he caught, only one name, didn't match anyone on the official public roster. They said the shutdown had to go through before the window closed, the mechanic explained. I thought they meant weather. Now I'm not so sure. The shed went silent. Rick knew there were only two reasons someone would rush a ban. Either he'd hit something valuable, or someone wanted him out of the way before he found it. The crew decided to move fast. If the ban was real, even temporarily, the board could legally seize any active geological data from his operation. That meant core samples, drill logs, seismic readings, everything. So they split into pairs, slipping through the darkness and collecting every core tube, vial, and binder with mineral traces inside. The samples were loaded into an old utility truck with its headlights covered. Rick ordered all radio communication stopped immediately. Any frequency they used could be triangulated. GPS beacons were switched to encrypted mode, a protocol Rick had only used once before, during a territorial dispute 2 seasons back. As the truck rumbled away with the evidence, Rick stood alone for a moment, staring across the valley toward Parker's lights in the distance. He didn't know yet about the leaked memo, the violation code that didn't exist, or the seismic anomalies Parker had already detected. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone wanted him off the map, not downscaled, not delayed, gone. And while the Yukon slept under the thin glow of the northern lights, 2 operations, one shutting down in secrecy, the other accelerating with military-level precision, moved toward a collision neither man could avoid. Rick guarded his core samples like evidence in a criminal case, unaware that Parker had already identified the first hint of a geological pattern that only surfaces once every few decades. Parker pushed forward blind to the fact that Rick's preserved cores could legally redraw the valley's boundaries. The real war for the underground corridor had begun long before either man touched a shovel, and by sunrise, the truth behind the shutdown would start bleeding into the open. That truth arrived in the form of a forgotten journal, worn leather, yellowed pages, coordinates scrawled in the margins, pulled from a box of estate paperwork purchased at auction by a retired prospector. Inside was the kind of description Yukon geologists insist is impossible, a twisted subchannel that bent, looped, and shifted every few dozen meters, creating natural gold traps big enough to hoard wealth for millennia. The sketch inside, frantic but deliberate, mapped a structure identical to the one Rick's final drill hole had pierced before everything went dark. It was the missing link neither man knew existed, yet the clearest sign that the battle unfolding above ground was only a shadow of what waited beneath. Rick studied the journal in the dim light of his truck cab, turning the pages slowly, feeling each note tighten the noose around the situation. Whoever filed the ban knew something. Not suspected. Knew. The ban wasn't about compliance, environmental risk, or paperwork delays. It was a maneuver meant to freeze him in place before he could hit the exact spot the journal predicted. The handwriting mentioned a single phrase 3 times. Once it bends, it empties. Rick didn't know exactly what that meant, but his gut knew enough. Someone else did, and they wanted him out before he got there. Across the valley, the atmosphere inside Parker's mobile command trailer had sharpened into something close to controlled chaos. Parker had just received a text from an anonymous number, a number without a name, a number that disappeared 30 seconds after the message came through. His claim isn't protected, clock's running. No explanation, no follow-up. But Parker didn't need any. His eyes flicked sideways to the seismic map again, the deep vibrations still echoing from the direction of Rick's halted operation. Parker wasn't impulsive by nature, not anymore. But this wasn't a moment for hesitation. If Rick's claim was in limbo, even temporarily, the mineral rights laws opened up a narrow, dangerous window. And in that gap, territory could shift faster than paperwork could catch up. Parker ordered an immediate mobilization. Not a normal shift, not a slow repositioning, an all-out reallocation. 2 full crews pulled from the Big Red Cut. 3 dozers rerouted from ongoing overburden removal. A wash plant, one of his newest, hitched to transport with instructions to move before sunrise. His foreman stared, stunned. Mid-season shifts on this scale didn't happen. They weren't logistically possible, except Parker made them possible, forcing every machine he had to pivot with a precision that felt military. His geologist stepped in, trying one last time to pull him back. "If you're wrong," she warned, "you're burning millions you won't get back." But Parker's expression didn't waver. He felt something he rarely admitted out loud. Instinct. A pressure, a pull, a sense that the valley was offering an opportunity that comes once in a generation. The anonymous message, the shutdown, the seismic pulse, the map anomalies. They weren't separate events. They were pieces of a single, invisible chain reaction. He triggered a protocol he hadn't touched in years, one he'd built quietly with a strategist he trusted far more than the mining board. Operation Aftershock, a land positioning plan designed to sweep into vulnerable zones before rivals even realized the borders had shifted. The plan was never meant to be used publicly. It was a contingency for emergencies, territorial collapses, or sudden claim destabilizations. And tonight, that moment had arrived. His crews moved like a coordinated strike team, racing across the valley while Rick's claim lay silent under the moonlight, frozen by an order nobody could justify. Rick, unaware of Parker's accelerating advance, walked into the mining board building for what was labeled a temporary status justification hearing. It was a procedural tool used only in catastrophic situations: mine collapses, toxic spills, unstable rock structures. Never for a routine seasonal miner. The room was overly formal, too quiet, the fluorescent lights flickering in a way that accentuated just how wrong the atmosphere felt. The board members sat unusually stiff, eyes down, papers perfectly squared on the table, as if they were afraid to give away any tells. Rick took his seat without speaking, letting the silence settle. When he finally asked for evidence behind the ban, their hesitation was immediate. One official shuffled papers without looking up. Another cleared her throat and pretended to read from a document that clearly had nothing to do with the issue. A third simply offered a vague, scripted line. "We are prioritizing environmental uncertainties at your site." Rick cut her off. "Show me the data." Still nothing. No surveys. No compliance reports. No violations. The board had enacted a shutdown without a single piece of supporting documentation. Rick leaned forward, his voice calm but edged. "You banned a working operation without evidence. So who gave the order?" That was when one of them slipped. A middle-aged board member with shaking hands let frustration crack through his professional mask. "Certain interests felt your claim's location presented complications," he said before biting the words off. He realized too late that he'd said the quiet part out loud. A location, not an action, not a violation, a location, a place on the map someone didn't want Rick standing on. Rick sat back slowly, feeling the implications press down. "Complications," he repeated, studying their faces. They avoided his gaze, every single one of them. In that moment, the truth clicked perfectly into place. The ban wasn't about risk. It wasn't about rules. It was about territory, timing the freeze so someone else could move in before Rick realized what he'd drilled into. They expected him to shrug it off as paperwork. They expected him not to push, not to notice the missing forms, the evasive answers, the manufactured urgency. But Rick read people the same way he read the earth. The tension, the hesitation, the things they didn't say. Someone had engineered this, and the board knew he'd uncovered it faster than they ever anticipated. The instant he stepped out of that hearing room, they understood they no longer controlled the chain reaction they'd set off. And that reaction was already unfolding on the ground. While Rick was piecing together the politics behind the ban, Parker's crew hit the exact transitional zone the board hoped he'd never reach. The soil didn't shift gradually. It snapped into a new identity. Yukon gray dissolving into a sudden blaze of deep orange. The unmistakable iron oxide burn of an ancient slow-water trap. A dozer clawed into the seam and peeled back overburden like bark from a soaked log, revealing compacted gravels as untouched as fossil beds. Parker stepped out without a word, drawn to the ground like it was speaking directly to him. His foreman waited for orders he never gave. Parker knelt, ran his hand across the dense strata, and in the silent tilt of layers and the unnatural weight of the gravel, he saw the same truth the 1980s journal hinted at, and the very truth Rick's final drill hole had brushed against before the band shut him down. A prehistoric gold trap lay beneath them, and both men were now converging on it from opposite sides of a conflict that was no longer theoretical. It was already happening. Across town, Rick's phone lights up with a number he doesn't recognize. He answers anyway, expecting another bureaucratic roadblock, but instead hears a voice he hasn't heard in years. A former territorial mining inspector who retired after calling out the wrong political donor. The man doesn't speak directly. He uses coded phrasing reserved for miners who don't want their lines tapped. Protocol 7B, he says. Nobody files 7B unless they're hiding a land shift. Rick's blood runs cold. Weeks earlier, he'd noticed subtle discrepancies in boundary data. Tiny, almost imperceptible differences he chalked up to clerical error. The inspector continues. A tectonic microslip, so small it barely registered on sensors, nudged several boundary markers just enough to reroute projected mineral channels on paper. The shift placed the richest predicted zone exactly along Parker's claim line, but not entirely within Parker's ground. The zone straddles both claims, depending entirely on how the board interprets the pre-slip geological rights. Rick feels the entire setup tightening around his throat. The ban wasn't a punishment. It was a timed removal. They needed him gone long enough for the new boundary models to finalize before he could contest them. The inspector leaves him with one final warning. If you don't challenge it now, they'll redraw the corridor out from under you forever. Rick storms into his workspace, tearing through stacks of reports and pulling every core sample recorded from the past 2 seasons. The picture forms quickly. His deepest drills intersected with the same shifting sub-channel pattern described in the 1980s journal. He gathers seismic charts, hand-drawn sketches, micro-density scans, and modern geological overlays, building a case so detailed it looks like a criminal investigation. His evidence shows the corridor bending, twisting, and resurfacing through both claims without favor. He books an emergency presentation with the board, knowing time is now his only enemy. Meanwhile, Parker's camp prepares its own scientific arsenal. His drone pilots fly continuous LiDAR sweeps over the buffer zone, stitching the data into a multi-layered terrain map with sub-centimeter accuracy. The scans contradict Rick's data completely. The corridor appears to dip sharply under Parker's side only, bypassing Rick's drill sites entirely. The two models don't align, don't overlap, don't even share the same curvature. For a formation supposedly carved by water over thousands of years, the inconsistencies are impossible. Someone's data is wrong, or someone's data has been fed information not available to the public. When Parker arrives at the board with his polished digital presentation, he walks in with the calm of a man who believes the ground itself has chosen his side. Rick enters moments later, carrying weathered binders, handwritten notes, analog seismic charts, and the journal that started the entire chain reaction. Both men place their evidence before a panel that suddenly looks like they'd rather be anywhere else on Earth. The atmosphere turns electric as screen projections clash with old maps, digital terrain models collide with paper sketches, and geological truth fractures into dueling interpretations. The board chair studies Parker's LiDAR map, then Rick's analog seismic printouts, then back again. The two data sets might as well have come from different planets. Rick slams his palm on the table and accuses Parker of using classified geological maps, restricted contour sheets that only the board and select government surveyors ever see. Parker fires back instantly, calling Rick's data outdated, inconsistent, and based on legend chasing instead of modern science. The board tries to restore order, but the room has already detonated into a war of expertise, pride, and suspicion. Rick demands to know how Parker acquired data collected less than 36 hours after the land shift was logged. Parker demands to know why Rick's deepest drill logs never made it into the public archive. Accusations fly, tempers ignite, documents scatter across the table. The board attempts to reassert control, but the truth is visible in their eyes. They're outmatched. 2 miners, 2 data sets, 2 clashing realities, and buried between them sits a gold corridor that defies every geological rule ever written. The air thickens as each side fires their final arguments, not just about ownership, but about who's been moving pieces behind the curtain. Every hesitation, Every evasive glance from the board tells Rick they know exactly how deep this manipulation goes, and Parker senses it too. The room doesn't end in a ruling, it ends in paralysis. The board cornered by evidence so contradictory it threatens to dismantle their entire permitting system. That pressure finally snaps the stalemate. With no legal pathway left, the board authorizes the last mechanism Yukon law allows when facts break down: a provisional extraction test. Ownership will go to the miner who physically exposes the corridor first. No appeals, no reinterpretations, no bureaucratic shelter. The instant the ruling reaches the valley, the entire landscape reacts like a detonated charge. Parker launches his crew with frightening precision, his operators cutting trenches with machine-perfect angles, blades shaving the ground layer by layer, as if sculpting their way toward the truth hidden below. Every 20 minutes he recalibrates, reading the earth like topographical code, shifting machinery with battlefield confidence. The war that began in the hearing room now rips across the soil itself, and both miners know the next shovel of dirt could rewrite the map of the valley forever. On the other side, Rick deploys a completely different strategy. Instead of ripping land apart horizontally, he goes vertical, ordering his driller to punch a single deep test hole straight into the suspected heart of the corridor. The bit barely touches the 10th meter before it grinds into dense black sand, a material that forms only where ancient gold channels once bottlenecked under extreme pressure. Rick signals to keep drilling deeper, and the whole rig vibrates like it's chewing through compressed history. Both camps ignite their engines to maximum capacity. Parker's wash plant rattles like a steel storm as thousands of gallons of water blast through sliders and sluices. Rick's compressor roars so violently the valley floor trembles in rhythm. Dust clouds rise, echoing across the Yukon like rival war cries. For the first time in territorial mining history, two crews, competitors, rivals, legends in their own rights, are operating at full capacity on land whose ownership isn't yet decided. Operators watch each other across the boundary like opposing armies. Mechanics sprint between machines. Surveyors update coordinates in real time, feeding information back to their leads. Every passing minute feels like a countdown to the moment one side strikes geologic truth first. Then it happens. Not on one side, but on both. Parker's grisly bars start screaming as something enormous slams against them. Boulders coated with thick, unmistakable streaks of visible gold. Not flecks, not dust, sheets, patterns, veins. The kind that occur only where gold has been migrating, pooling, and trapping uninterrupted for tens of thousands of years. His foreman yells for him to look, and Parker sprints up the catwalk as if gravity itself has lost interest in stopping him. The sight freezes him. These are the richest boulder coatings he's ever seen in open-cut mining. Proof beyond argument that the corridor bends onto his side with unbelievable force. But before he can even radio the board, Rick's drill rig erupts. The test hole spits slurry out of the top, a geyser of black sand mixed with coarse gold, so bright it glints through mud and sunlight. Chunks, not flakes, hit the catch pan, some the size of marbles, others like broken nuggets pried from a queen's vault. Rick's driller backs away, stunned, whispering, "It's running your way, Rick. It's really running your way." Rick grabs a handful of the slurry, letting gold roll between his fingers as he stares toward Parker's side of the valley. They both hit pay, and the board knows it. Word spreads within minutes, two competing camps producing corridor-level gold simultaneously, something that has never once happened in the recorded mining history of the Yukon. The board members, already panicked by their inability to reconcile conflicting geological evidence, scramble to interpret the law. The territory's mining regulations, written decades ago, contain a clause written for extreme emergencies. When two parties prove equal geological rights at the same time, the ruling defaults not to maps or history, but to extraction speed. Whoever delivers the first official sample to the board becomes the corridor's provisional legal controller for the remainder of the season. A storm of motion erupts. Parker loads his sample into a sealed evidence case and dispatches his fastest driver. Rick does the same. The board prepares timestamps. The valley watches, breath held, as two trucks tear across the dusty access road toward Dawson. one carrying Parker's gold-laced boulder fragments, the other carrying Rick's coarse nugget slurry. Every second matters. Every corner becomes a life-or-death calculation. Even radio chatter goes silent. 17 minutes. That's the number burned into Yukon mining legend forever. Parker's evidence arrives 17 minutes before Rick's, an interval so small it feels like an insult, yet large enough under territorial law to define ownership. When the board stamps the papers, Parker is officially awarded full seasonal extraction rights to the corridor. Not partial, not shared, full. The richest subsurface structure discovered in the modern era of Yukon mining, one predicted in a forgotten 1980s journal, hinted at in shifting fault lines, and fought over through bans, hearings, and near-political sabotage, now falls under Parker Schnabel's control until winter freeze halts operations. Rick's ban is overturned just minutes later, but the damage is done. The corridor is legally Parker's for the duration of the season, and the ruling cannot be challenged until extraction closes. Parker leaves the hearing with a look that isn't triumph but focus, cold, deliberate, almost burdened by what he now controls. Rick steps out moments after, holding the sample that could have changed everything if it had arrived 17 minutes earlier. The weight of it isn't in the gold. It's in the message. The system didn't beat him, timing did, and timing can be reversed. He returns to his claim with a different expression than the one he carried all season. Not defeated, not broken. Something sharper, something calculating, something ready to wage a different kind of war. The valley watches as Rick stands over the ground he nearly lost, staring across the distance to Parker's side. The season ends not with a winner and a loser, but with a silent understanding etched into Yukon soil. The next move Rick makes won't simply challenge Parker's control. It will rewrite the territory's mining playbook forever.